Neil, it's been a really interesting conference we've had for the past 2 days with the USEF. And one of the things we've been focused on, and you're a champion, is that we really have to establish a basis of research. And you really made the point. There is a body of knowledge now, and it's just almost unexcusable or inexcusable that we're not doing that more. You've cited a variety of examples, but a couple have been really interesting. Could you identify one example of research having a practical application?
Yeah, let me give you a very simple thing. Take trust. Everyone has known, well, even way back to ancient Greek times, that transactions between people depend on trust. Sales depends on trust. And we've always said, well, if you're going to sell, you have to create trust from your customer. Now, that's easy to say, but what does it actually mean? Until you start doing some research, trust is this big, amorphous thing. When you start doing research, you can break it down into some components. We had a chance to do this with one big accounting company that had several thousand auditors who needed to be retrained to sell tax and consulting services.
To be more trusted.
And, well, to be trusted was part of the issue. Because these were auditors, so they felt they were really trustworthy people.
Okay.
This was in the days before Arthur Anderson, of course, when auditors were perceived as trustworthy. But when they went out to sell, they failed. And the chief reason that came back in terms of customer feedback was that customers didn't trust them. And of course, the auditing firm was outraged and said, we're so trustworthy, why is this? Because it seems a paradox that here are true professionals who are being rated badly on trust.
And licensed and bonded and all these
that's
things.
Right.
Yes,
that's right. And so one of the things that they asked us to do was to go around and interview customers to try and tease out by research exactly what customers meant by trust. And what happens is we find we can break it into 3 major pieces. There are 3 components of trust that outweigh all the others, and we call them the 3 C's. The first one is candor, honesty, integrity, saying it as it is, not exaggerating.
What would you call the opposite of candor?
Well, dissembling and deception.
Okay.
Because it's not just straight telling the truth or telling lies. Candor, basically, is about saying things like, I don't know. Never trying to fudge it.
Okay.
So people who are candid come across as they're telling it like it is. But that's only one component. You can have very candid people who don't create trust.
Right.
The second component is competence. If you're choosing someone to advise you, but after all consultative sales is about advising and solving problems for the customer. If you're not competent to solve the problem, the customer's not going to trust you.
Help me understand for a second. If these were quote-unquote licensed and trained auditors, what might be an example or a behavior they might do to create the impression that they weren't competent? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, actually, these folks were rated very high on competence.
Okay.
It was when we started extending this research into some other fields, we found, for example, a lot of high-tech salespeople weren't rated as competent. In fact, the old joke, what's the difference between people selling high technology and people selling used cars? And the answer is, the people who sell used cars know
what
that
they're
they're right.
about.
That, if you chuckle at the joke, it tells you that we know that a lot of technology salespeople don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But not because they're lying, but because they don't have competence.
And they don't know they don't know.
And they don't know they don't know.
Yeah.
And they may be selling vaporware or whatever. But then you'll find professionals like auditors are rated high on competence. But if they weren't, they wouldn't be trusted.
Okay.
So we know you've got to have candor. We know you've got to have competence. The third is you've got to have concern. And what I mean by concern is you've got to be more interested in the customer than interested in yourself.
Right.
Customers don't trust people who think I'm pushing a sale at them. They don't trust people who they think don't understand them. In order for you to trust me as an advisor and a salesperson, a problem solver who's going to help you, you have to think that I am sitting on your side of the table, thinking of the issues the way you think about it. You have to feel I'm listening to what matters to you, not pushing what I think is the solution I would like. You know? This is one of the reasons sometimes why very intellectually bright people in sales don't create trust.
Yeah.
They're too busy outsmarting the customer.
Yeah.
And the customer doesn't feel, here's someone who's listening to me. Here's someone who's on my side of the table. So you need candor, you need competence, and you need concern. Now here's the question. Which one do you think is rated most important by customers?
Okay.
They all have to be there. But
Yeah, I'm tempted
higher
just because of the order that you presented them into would be to say that the competence issue is probably less of a concern because companies can recognize that that's a problem quickly.
Yes.
The concern, I'm going to suggest, is probably gone away. Not gone away, but is less reduced because that's almost the old school of Joe Azuzu in the ads, the phony con man salesman, the huckster kind of impression. So the reality is, I would guess it has to be the candor, because people are more concerned about exposing flaws and weaknesses or lack of knowledge or something along that line. How close was I?
Well, pretty close. In fact, competence is the one that is most wished for. Because above everything, as far as the customer is concerned, someone who's on their side of the table, someone who's listening to them and their needs and their issues, someone who's not trying to push their own agenda, but is focused on your agenda, that seems to be a starting point. And when that's missing, it really hurts. But let me, if I could.
Can I ask you a question? Is it also possible that the customer is capable of recognizing lack of candor and capable of recognizing the lack of
competence?
No. Well, let me say it in reverse. I'm thinking that more customers are uncomfortable that they can rate the competence of the individual, because that's, after all, why they're outsourcing, because they don't have that expertise.
Yeah, competence is fairly hard to assess. And one of the things which is interesting is we assess competence through concern. Let me give an example. One of my co-workers on this, a man called John Wilson, while we were doing this research, his daughter had a really high fever. And they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, send her home, give her a fever reduction pill.
Take an aspirin and call me in the morning.
And he was furious. But the insight he had was, the doctor didn't show concern, but what John was questioning was his competence.
Yeah.
So I think if concern isn't there, we often will question competence. But now let me look at generally some research here, which should open our eyes a bit. If you look across the whole field of professional salespeople, what you find is that 83% of them are rated by their customers as adequate or better in terms of candor.
Okay.
So they come across as honest, genuine people. They're not exaggerating, not pushing things. 66%, about two-thirds, are adequate in terms of competence. Only 35% get adequate or better ratings for concern.
Sure. Okay, so the selfishness issue is...
Two-thirds of salespeople destroy trust by creating customer suspicion that they're pursuing their own agenda, not the customer's agenda. Now, I find that an interesting little insight of what research does. Because now we've taken a big subject like trust, we've been able to break it down into some pieces, and I can start helping people understand how to create trust, because I'm now starting to get a more granular language for talking about it. And that would be an example of how research helps.
When we look at the solution you might suggest, obviously this can trail off into a lot of directions. From an operational or practical point of view, if I'm a sales manager, how do I go about thinking about this to start with? Monday morning, I want to look at my folks and understand this.
Well, I think I just take the statistics. say most professional business-to-business salespeople are remarkably honest folks.
Okay.
They're not lying, they're not deceiving. They are generally fairly competent, even though very often they're advising on problems where the solution is just emerging out of the discussion. At the same time, they've often done it before, they know what they're doing. Concern is the piece we don't train for.
Okay.
If, for example, you're an accountant, if, for example, you're a lawyer, if you're any kind of professional, you're honest because it's part of your code of ethics.
Right.
You're competent because that's what's made you a professional. You've learned the fundamentals. But no one trains you in concern.
Okay.
And so that's where I would begin.
That's a great start. Thank you very much, sir.